The Galactic Environmental Assessment Committee had seen many things in their collective centuries of service. They'd witnessed the molten hellscapes of Inferno Prime, where temperatures reached a balmy 2,000 degrees, and the locals considered it nippy. They'd catalogued the crushing depths of Pressure Station Omega, where breathing required industrial-grade lung enhancement. They'd even endured the psychological torment of listening to Glorbian opera for 17 straight hours during their cultural sensitivity training. But Kepler 442b, this frozen wasteland, had them stumped. "The atmospheric readings are concerning," announced Committee Chair Grexthal, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he reviewed the datapad. His species, the Thermacari, were notorious for their ability to withstand temperatures that would flash freeze most beings, but even they drew the line somewhere. That line was apparently -20 degrees Celsius. Kepler 442b was currently enjoying a pleasant spring day at -43. Environmental specialist Quendari shifted uncomfortably in her heated environmental suit, the external temperature readings making her skin crawl beneath her thermal layers. "Chair Grexthal, perhaps we should recommend immediate classification as a Class X uninhabitable zone. No known species could possibly establish any form of sustainable presence in these conditions." The committee murmured their agreement, a sound like wind chimes in a tornado. Outside their heavily insulated observation vessel, Kepler 442b stretched endlessly in all directions, a canvas of white death punctuated by crystalline formations that might have been beautiful if they weren't essentially tombstones for any life foolish enough to venture onto the surface. "I concur," Grexthal declared, his voice carrying the weight of bureaucratic finality. "We'll file the paperwork immediately. Another world consigned to the archives of places that will kill you faster than a Corthian tax audit." That's when the human vessel arrived. Dr. Faye Winters had been having what could charitably be called a challenging morning. First, the navigation system had decided to update itself mid-flight, which was like having your brain decide to rearrange itself while you were performing surgery. Second, her research grant had been reassessed by the Galactic Science Council, which was bureaucrat speak for, "We're cutting your funding because we spent the budget on a solid gold conference table." Third, and most irritatingly, she'd been assigned to what the council termed a routine environmental assessment of some backwater iceball that nobody cared about. She should have been studying the fascinating bacterial ecosystems of the Andorian cloud forests. Instead, she was piloting a cramped research vessel toward a planet that looked like it had been designed by someone with a severe case of seasonal depression. "Hey, Doc," called Gus Fletcher from the maintenance bay, his voice echoing through the ship's communication system with the cheerful indifference of someone who'd learned long ago that complaining about work assignments was like trying to teach a fish to appreciate jazz. "We're getting some weird readings from the planet's surface. Looks like we've got company." Faye glanced at her sensors, noting the thermal signatures of what appeared to be several vessels in orbit. "Probably another assessment team. Maybe they can tell us why the council thinks this frozen marble is worth anyone's time." She began the standard approach sequence, her fingers dancing across controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been landing ships on hostile worlds since before half the galaxy had discovered fire. Below them, Kepler 442b rotated with the slow majesty of a cosmic snowball, its surface features visible through the surprisingly clear atmosphere. "Temperatures reading -43, Gus reported, checking his instruments with the thoroughness of a man who'd learned that shoddy maintenance was a quick path to becoming space debris. "Hope you packed the thermal gear," Faye snorted, the sound carrying equal parts amusement and disdain. "-43. That's practically tropical. Remind me to tell you about that time I spent a winter in Minnesota." Aboard the committee vessel, chaos was beginning to unfold with the slow-motion inevitability of a bureaucratic disaster. The arrival of the human ship had triggered every emergency protocol in the book, plus several that had been hastily invented on the spot. "They're descending toward the surface," Quendari shrieked, her voice climbing octaves like a musical scale of terror. "They'll be dead within minutes. The exposure suits couldn't possibly handle those temperatures." Grexthal was frantically consulting his species database, his multiple eyes scanning data with the desperate intensity of someone trying to find a loophole in physics. Humans. Humans. Here we are. Terrestrial species, carbon-based, temperature tolerance ranging from... He paused, blinking all 4 eyes in sequence. This can't be right. What is it? Quendari leaned over his shoulder, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet despite the suit's heating system. According to this, humans have survived in natural environments ranging from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius, without artificial life support. Grexthal's voice carried the incredulous tone of someone reading their own obituary. That's impossible. No species has that kind of temperature range adaptation. The database must be corrupted, Quendari declared with the certainty of someone clinging to rationality with both hands. Or it's some kind of measurement error. Perhaps they meant -40 minutes before death. Their conversation was interrupted by a communication request from the human vessel. Grexthal accepted it with the reluctance of someone answering a call from their least favorite relative. The human who appeared on their screen was, by galactic standards, utterly unremarkable. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing what appeared to be standard-issue research clothing. She looked like she was about to examine pond scum, not potentially become pond scum herself. "This is Dr. Faye Winters of the Terran research vessel Dorothy May," the human said, her tone carrying the professional courtesy of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. "We're here for the environmental assessment. I'm assuming you're the advanced team?" Grexathol found himself momentarily speechless, a condition that occurred roughly as often as solar eclipses on binary star systems. "Dr. Winters, are you aware of the surface conditions?" Faye glanced at something off-screen, presumably an instrument panel. -43 Celsius, low humidity, minimal atmospheric disturbance. Looks pretty standard for a winter assessment. She paused, studying the committee members visible on her screen. "You folks seem a bit overdressed for the conditions." "Overdressed?" Quendari's voice cracked like ice in a thaw. "Dr. Winters, those are military-grade environmental suits. They're rated for the most extreme conditions known to galactic science." "Huh," Faye replied, with the kind of conversational tone normally reserved for discussing the weather. "Well, different species, different needs, I guess. We'll be setting up our base camp on the surface within the hour. Standard survey should take about a week." The communication ended, leaving the committee members staring at their blank screen with the collective expression of people who'd just watched someone casually announce their intention to juggle live grenades. "A week," Grexthal whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of their life support systems. "She's planning to spend a week on the surface." "We have to stop them," Quendari declared, already reaching for the emergency communication controls. "We can't just watch an entire species commit accidental suicide through ignorance of basic physics." Down on the surface, Faye was running through her pre-landing checklist with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this particular dance more times than she cared to count. The Dorothy May settled onto the frozen ground with a gentle thump that barely registered through the ship's shock absorbers. "Landing successful," she reported to Gus, who was already preparing the equipment bay for surface operations. "External temperature holding steady at -43. Wind's pretty calm, visibility's excellent. Could be worse." "Could be Minnesota in January," Gus agreed, pulling on his outer jacket with the casual efficiency of someone preparing for a particularly chilly morning walk. "Ready when you are, Doc." Faye sealed her research kit, double-checked her sample containers, and pulled on her winter coat. It was a perfectly ordinary winter coat, the kind of garment that could be purchased at any outdoor supply store from Anchorage to Antarctica. To anyone watching from orbit, it looked about as protective as tissue paper. She cycled through the airlock, stepped onto the surface of Kepler 442b, and took a deep breath of the crystalline air. It was cold. Definitely cold. The kind of cold that made your nose hairs freeze and your breath visible in small puffs. But it was also familiar. The kind of cold she'd experienced during winter fieldwork in Alaska, Canada, and Norway. Uncomfortable, but hardly lethal. "Surface conditions confirmed," she reported via her communication device, her voice steady and professional. "Beginning initial survey." Aboard the committee vessel, several crew members had gathered around the external observation screens, watching the impossible scene unfolding below them. A human being was walking around on the surface of Kepler 4442b wearing nothing more than what appeared to be casual winter clothing. "She's not even wearing a breathing apparatus," someone whispered, their voice carrying the awed tone normally reserved for witnessing miracles or massive explosions. "Look at her posture," another observer noted. "She's not hunched over, not moving like someone fighting for survival. She's actually examining things, like she's on a nature walk." Faye had indeed begun her standard survey routine, collecting atmospheric readings, soil samples, and basic geological data. She moved across the frozen landscape with the confident stride of someone who'd spent years trudging through hostile environments in the name of science. Every few minutes, she'd stop, crouch down, and examine something of interest, making notes on her data pad with fingers that showed no signs of the hypothermic stiffness that should have rendered her unconscious within minutes. "Emergency medical team to the ready room," Grexthal commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Prepare for immediate surface rescue operations, full thermal recovery protocols." "Sir," reported the medical team leader, "our equipment isn't rated for extended surface operations in these conditions. We'd need to engineer a completely new rescue apparatus." "Then engineer it," Grexthal snapped, his usual bureaucratic composure cracking like ice under pressure. "We can't just watch a sentient being freeze to death." But Faye showed no signs of freezing to death. If anything, she seemed to be getting more comfortable as she worked. After an hour of surface operations, she'd removed her outer gloves to get a better grip on her sampling equipment. After 2 hours, she'd unzipped her jacket. The committee members watched in horrified fascination as their fundamental understanding of biological possibility crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Call in the xenobiology team," Grexthal ordered, his voice hollow with the sound of a worldview collapsing. "And someone get me a direct line to the Galactic Science Council. I think we're going to need to revise some textbooks." Down on the surface, Faye paused in her work to appreciate the stark beauty of the frozen landscape. The crystalline formations caught the pale sunlight, creating patterns of refracted light that were genuinely stunning. It reminded her of winter camping in the Rockies, minus the risk of bears and plus the added interest of being on an entirely different world. Her communication device crackled to life. "Dr. Winters, this is Committee Chair Grexthal. Are you feeling well?" Faye looked up toward the committee vessel, a distant speck against the pale sky. "I'm fine, thanks. Getting some excellent samples up here. The mineral formations are fascinating. Ice crystal structure suggests some interesting atmospheric chemistry." There was a long pause. "Dr. Winters, you've been exposed to lethal surface conditions for over 2 hours. Our medical team is prepared to attempt an emergency extraction." "Lethal?" Faye laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the thin air. "Chair Grexthal, with respect, this isn't that bad. I mean, it's cold, sure, but I've worked in worse conditions in Alaska. At least, there aren't any mosquitoes." Another pause, longer this time. "Dr. Winters, what would you consider worse conditions?" "Well, there was this one research station in northern Canada where the temperature dropped to -57. Now, that was unpleasant. Had to keep the equipment in heated tents and rotate shifts every 20 minutes. This is actually pretty comfortable by comparison." Grexthal's voice, when it came back over the communication system, carried the strained quality of someone whose universe had just been turned inside out. "Dr. Winters, are you telling me that your species regularly operates in temperatures that would kill most known life forms?" Faye paused in her sampling, considering the question. "Well, I wouldn't say regularly, but yeah, humans work in all kinds of extreme environments. Arctic research, Antarctic stations, high-altitude expeditions. It's not that big a deal if you dress appropriately and know what you're doing." She looked down at her perfectly ordinary winter jacket and smiled. "Though I have to say you folks might want to invest in some better outdoor gear. Those suits you're wearing look like they'd be pretty cumbersome for fieldwork." The communication went silent. Above her, aboard the committee vessel, Grexthal sat staring at his instruments with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that everything they thought they knew about physics was actually an elaborate practical joke. "Contact the council," he said finally, his voice carrying the hollow tone of absolute defeat. Tell them we need to completely revise our understanding of environmental habitability parameters. What should we put in the initial report? Quendari asked, her stylus poised over her datapad. Grexthul looked out at the frozen wasteland where a human being was casually conducting scientific research in conditions that should have killed her instantly, wearing nothing more elaborate than what appeared to be a moderately warm jacket. Put down that we've encountered an impossible species, he said quietly, and that we're going to need a bigger heating bill. The Galactic Science Council's emergency meeting convened exactly 4 hours after Grexthul's initial report, which was approximately 3 hours and 59 minutes faster than any bureaucratic response in recorded galactic history. When career politicians start moving at light speed, it usually means either war has been declared or someone has discovered a new way to violate the fundamental laws of physics. Dr. Velthari of the Felinian Research Institute materialized via holographic projection into the council chamber, her whiskers twitching with barely contained scientific excitement. She'd spent the better part of her career studying environmental adaptation, and the preliminary data streaming in from Kepler 442b was making her question everything she thought she knew about biological limitations. The thermal imaging is conclusive, she announced to the assembled representatives, her claws clicking against her datapad with mechanical precision. The human subject is maintaining a core body temperature of approximately 37 degrees Celsius while operating in ambient conditions that should induce hypothermic shock within minutes. Ambassador Othvex, representing the diplomatic corps, shifted uncomfortably in his environmental suit. The council chamber was maintained at what most species considered a comfortable temperature, but after reviewing the Kepler 442b footage, even 20 degrees Celsius felt uncomfortably chilly. Dr. Velthari, are we certain this isn't some form of advanced technological augmentation? Perhaps the humans have developed internal heating devices. Negative, Velthari replied, her tail swishing with the agitated motion of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled. Detailed scans show no artificial implants, no technological enhancement, no exotic energy signatures. The human appears to be operating entirely within the parameters of biological adaptation. Trade Minister Quelsan, whose species had evolved in the thermal vents of deep ocean worlds, raised a tentacle in what passed for his people as a gesture of profound confusion. This makes no economic sense. If such adaptation were possible, entire sectors of the galactic economy would need restructuring. The thermal protection industry alone represents 17 trillion credits in annual revenue. The observation was met with the kind of thoughtful silence that usually preceded either revolutionary breakthroughs or complete civilizational collapse, possibly both. Meanwhile, back on Kepler 442b's surface, Faye was having the time of her professional life. The planet's unique atmospheric conditions were creating ice formations unlike anything she'd seen in 2 decades of environmental research. Delicate crystalline structures rose from the frozen ground like natural sculptures, their surfaces refracting the pale sunlight into prismatic rainbows that would have made any art gallery weep with envy. "Gus, you need to see this," she called out, her breath visible in small puffs that dissipated quickly in the dry air. "These mineral deposits are showing some really interesting stratification patterns." Gus Fletcher emerged from the Dorothy May, carrying a portable analysis kit and wearing what could generously be described as a heavy sweater. To the alien observers still watching from orbit, it looked like he was preparing to work outside in his underwear. "Nice formations," he agreed, setting down his equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years making the impossible look routine. "Temperatures dropped a bit since this morning, probably down to -45 now." "Good," Faye replied absently, focused on collecting a particularly interesting sample. "The colder temperatures should give us better preservation of the crystalline structures. Hand me that thermal probe, would you?" This conversation was being monitored by no fewer than 17 different scientific institutions, 12 government agencies, and one very confused pizza delivery service that had accidentally tapped into the wrong communication frequency. The collective response could best be described as the sound of jaws hitting floors across multiple star systems. Dr. Thexmol, Director of Environmental Sciences at the Fellinian Research Institute, was reviewing the communication transcripts with the growing horror of someone watching their life's work being fed through a paper shredder. They're discussing the temperature drop as if it's beneficial, as if colder conditions improve their working environment. His research assistant, a young Fellinian named Kexprin, looked up from her calculations with the wide-eyed expression of someone who'd just discovered that mathematics was actually an elaborate form of interpretive dance. Director, if these readings are accurate, this human female has been operating in lethal conditions for over 8 hours. She should be experiencing advanced hypothermia, cellular damage, circulatory failure, and... She paused, checking her notes. Complete biological shutdown. And instead? Instead, she appears to be enjoying herself. The statement hung in the air like a philosophical challenge to the entire concept of environmental science. Back in the council chamber, General Fosseron of the Cryogenic Defense Corps was experiencing what his species referred to as a tactical impossibility seizure, a condition that occurred when career military officers encountered situations that violated everything they understood about strategic planning. If humans can operate effectively in these conditions, he said slowly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone working through a complex equation, then every cold-weather defense installation in the galaxy is potentially compromised. Our entire Arctic defense strategy is based on the assumption that no species could mount sustained operations in sub-zero environments. Commander Dex, while his second-in-command, was reviewing tactical assessments with the grim efficiency of someone calculating their own obsolescence. Sir, if humans can work in -40-degree conditions wearing what appears to be casual clothing, our thermal barrier defenses are essentially useless against them. They could walk through our most heavily defended ice worlds like they were visiting a recreational facility. Recreational facility, General Fosseron repeated, his voice climbing several octaves. Sir, according to these intercepts, the human female referred to similar conditions as pretty comfortable by comparison to other environments where her species routinely operates. The general sat down heavily, his chair groaning under the weight of someone whose entire career had just been rendered theoretically irrelevant. What kind of species considers lethal environmental conditions to be recreational? The question would later be studied by philosophers, theologians, and bartenders across 17 different star systems, none of whom would come up with a satisfactory answer. Meanwhile, Faye had moved to a new sample site approximately 2 kilometers from their landing zone, leaving a trail of footprints in the snow that the alien observers were analyzing with the intensity of people studying ancient hieroglyphs. Each step represented a biological impossibility, a casual violation of known science that made theoretical physicists across the galaxy question their life choices. The substrate composition here is fascinating, she reported via communication link, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered something genuinely interesting. Looks like we're seeing evidence of cyclic freeze-thaw patterns, which suggests this planet might have seasonal temperature variations. Grexthal, who had been monitoring the communications with the dedication of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion, felt compelled to respond. Dr. Winters, our preliminary models suggest that seasonal temperature variations on this world could range from the current -43 degrees to potentially -60 or lower. Really? Faye's voice brightened with genuine interest. That's excellent. Lower temperatures would create even better preservation conditions for geological samples. We might be able to extend our survey timeline to catch the seasonal transition. The silence that followed this statement was so profound that several alien species later claimed they could hear the sound of universal constants weeping. Dr. Velthari, who had been recording every word of the exchange, found herself staring at her notes with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that gravity was actually optional. She wants to stay longer, she whispered to her research team. The conditions that would kill most known life forms in minutes, and she wants to experience them when they get worse. Her assistant, Kexprin, had stopped taking notes entirely and was simply staring at the data with the glazed expression of someone whose brain had politely requested a temporary leave of absence. Director, I think we may need to completely revise our understanding of what constitutes habitable conditions. Revise? Dr. Velthari laughed, the sound carrying the slightly hysterical edge of someone watching their academic credentials evaporate in real time. My dear Keksprin, we may need to throw out the entire field of environmental biology and start over from basic principles. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the planetary monitoring station. Gus had emerged from the Dorothy May carrying what appeared to be construction equipment, specifically the components for some kind of temporary shelter. Setting up the extended research station, he reported matter-of-factly, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone announcing their intention to reorganize a closet. Should have the main shelter operational within a few hours. Doc wants to set up a proper field laboratory. Extended research station? Grexthill's voice cracked like ice under stress. How extended? Standard setup, Gus replied, beginning to assemble what looked like a modular building framework. Food for about a month, basic lab equipment, sleeping quarters, you know, the usual. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as a human being casually began construction of a permanent habitation in conditions that their most advanced survival equipment could barely withstand for hours. A month, Commander Dexwheel repeated, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose strategic assumptions had just been systematically demolished. They're planning to live there for a month. In conditions that would kill our troops in minutes, General Fosran added, his voice barely above a whisper. While apparently enjoying themselves, Dr. Velthari concluded, her scientific objectivity finally giving way to something approaching existential crisis. The implications were staggering. If humans could not only survive but actually thrive in environments that the rest of the galaxy considered uninhabitable death zones, then virtually every assumption about planetary colonization, military strategy, and environmental science would need to be reconsidered. Trade Minister Quelsan was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. How many other uninhabitable worlds are there in our databases? Ambassador Othvex consulted his datapad with the mechanical movements of someone operating on autopilot. Approximately 47,000 worlds are classified as environmentally unsuitable for colonization due to extreme cold conditions. 47,000, Quelsan repeated slowly. 47,000 worlds that we've written off as useless, and humans might be able to walk around on them wearing, what did the human call it? A moderately warm jacket? The economic implications alone were enough to make several trade representatives excuse themselves from the chamber, presumably to make some very urgent calls to their investment advisors. Back on Kepler 442b, Faye had finished her initial survey and was reviewing her preliminary findings with the satisfaction of someone who'd had a productive day at the office. The frozen landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful in its stark simplicity and rich with scientific possibilities. Initial assessment complete, she reported, pulling off her outer gloves to get a better grip on her datapad. The gesture, transmitted to observers across the galaxy, caused 3 separate species to declare states of emergency. Conditions are well within acceptable parameters for extended human habitation. Recommend full colonization feasibility study. The statement hit the galactic scientific community like a meteorite strike. Full colonization feasibility study. On a world that had been classified as utterly uninhabitable by a species that considered lethal environmental conditions to be well within acceptable parameters. Dr. Velthari looked up from her frantically scribbling notes and addressed her research team with the weary authority of someone whose career had just taken a hard left turn into uncharted territory. Cancel all current research projects, she announced. From now on, we're studying humans. The news spread through galactic communication networks with the velocity of bad gossip at a diplomatic reception. Within hours, footage of humans casually constructing habitats in lethal conditions was being analyzed by xenobiologists, military strategists, and what could only be described as a rapidly forming cult of beings who believed they'd witnessed the emergence of a new form of divine life. On Therma 7, the planet's entire heating industry collapsed overnight when investors realized that humans might not actually need their products. Stock prices plummeted faster than the surface temperature on Kepler 442b, creating what economic historians would later refer to as the Great Thermal Recession of 2387. The Glacial Mining Consortium, which had spent centuries developing expensive robotic systems to extract resources from frozen worlds, watched their market capitalization evaporate as reports emerged of humans potentially doing the same work in casual attire. Chief Executive Freltox issued a statement that consisted entirely of incomprehensible sobbing, which was later translated as, "Our business model has become obsolete overnight." Military academies across 12 star systems suspended classes as instructors struggled to revise tactical doctrines that had been based on the fundamental assumption that extreme cold was an impenetrable natural barrier. General Fosseron found himself fielding calls from panicked defense ministers who wanted to know if their Iceworld military installations were now essentially decorative. The Felinian Research Institute declared a Code Orange academic emergency, the first time such a designation had been used since the infamous "Gravity is Actually Suggestions" incident of 2341. Dr. Velthari found herself appointed to head something called the Human Impossibility Task Force, a position that came with an unlimited research budget and what her colleagues described as a doomed career trajectory. Religious movements began forming around the concept of the Cold Walkers, with various species interpreting human thermal adaptation as everything from divine blessing to cosmic punishment for their own biological inadequacies. The Church of Perpetual Warmth issued a theological position paper questioning whether humans were actually a form of ice demon, which was later retracted after their legal department pointed out that ice demons probably wouldn't be conducting environmental surveys. Meanwhile, real estate speculators across the galaxy began purchasing options on worlds that had been classified as uninhabitable due to extreme cold. The planet Frostbite Prime, which had been available for the equivalent of pocket change, suddenly became the subject of bidding wars that drove its theoretical value higher than some developed star systems. Back on Kepler 442b, Faye had completed construction of what she cheerfully referred to as basic field accommodations, a modular habitat that looked suspiciously like something designed for long-term comfortable living rather than desperate survival. She'd even installed windows, apparently so she could enjoy the view of the frozen wasteland that was supposed to kill her. "Day 3 update," she reported via communication link, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone settling into a particularly nice vacation rental. "External temperature holding steady at -46 degrees. We've identified several promising research sites and should have comprehensive geological surveys completed within the week." The fact that she sounded more cheerful after 3 days in lethal conditions than most beings did during tropical holidays was not lost on the 17 different agencies monitoring her communications. Dr. Velthari, reviewing the latest reports, made a discovery that would later be considered either a breakthrough in xenobiology or the beginning of her complete psychological breakdown. "She's not just surviving," she announced to her increasingly traumatized research team. "Her bio-reading suggests she's actually more relaxed than when she first arrived." The statement was met with the kind of silence usually reserved for moments when fundamental reality takes an unexpected coffee break. Kexprin, who had been taking notes with mechanical persistence, finally set down her stylus and addressed the room with the hollow voice of someone whose worldview had been systematically destroyed. "Director, I think we need to consider the possibility that what we consider uninhabitable death worlds might actually be human vacation destinations." 3 weeks after what historians would later call the Great Thermal Revelation, the Galactic Environmental Council found itself in the unprecedented position of having to completely redefine the concept of planetary habitability. The emergency session convened in the Council's main chamber, which had been heated to what was now being called pre-human standards, a temperature that suddenly seemed almost tropical compared to the conditions where humans were apparently building vacation resorts. Ambassador Othvex opened the proceedings with all the enthusiasm of someone delivering their own eulogy. "Fellow representatives, we are here to address the adjustment of our planetary classification systems in light of recent discoveries regarding human environmental tolerance." The phrase "recent discoveries" carried the weight of civilizational upheaval. In the span of 3 weeks, humanity had gone from being considered a relatively unremarkable terrestrial species to the galactic equivalent of environmental superbeings who could apparently colonize worlds that would kill most other life forms through the simple expedient of wearing appropriate outerwear. Dr. Velthari, who had spent the intervening weeks in what could charitably be called intensive research mode, and what her colleagues described as complete academic breakdown, presented her findings with the weary precision of someone whose entire career had become an exercise in documenting the impossible. Our comprehensive analysis of human thermal adaptation capabilities reveals several significant factors that require immediate consideration, she began, her whiskers twitching with barely controlled hysteria. First, humans demonstrate functional operation in temperature ranges that span nearly 100 degrees Celsius. Second, they appear to consider extreme cold conditions not as survival challenges, but as minor inconveniences requiring basic preparation. Third, and perhaps most disturbing from a xenobiological perspective, they seem to actively enjoy what they term winter sports in environments that would cause immediate hypothermic death in most galactic species. Trade Minister Kwel-san, whose tentacles had developed a nervous twitch since the crisis began, raised the appendage in what his species considered a gesture of profound economic distress. Dr. Velthari, what are the implications for our current planetary asset evaluations? We have approximately 47,000 worlds classified as uninhabitable due to extreme cold conditions. Minister Kwel-san, Dr. Velthari replied with the hollow voice of someone delivering catastrophic news. Based on human environmental tolerance parameters, approximately 46,900 of those worlds should be reclassified as perfectly suitable for human colonization with minimal preparation requirements. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of several representatives frantically recalculating their species' territorial claims and trade agreements. The economic implications alone were staggering enough to make currency traders across 17 star systems experience what economists termed portfolio liquefaction events. General Phosphorus, whose military career had entered what could diplomatically be called a strategic reassessment phase, addressed the assembly with the measured tones of someone whose entire defensive doctrine had been rendered obsolete by basic human biology. From a security perspective, our current understanding of territorial defense assumes that extreme cold environments provide natural barriers to invasion or colonization. If humans can operate effectively in these conditions using readily available commercial equipment, our defensive positioning requires complete strategic revision. Commander Dexwile, who had been conducting what she optimistically called tactical adaptation exercises, and what her troops described as panic training, nodded grimly. Sir, our preliminary assessments suggest that humans could potentially establish military operations on worlds we've classified as naturally defended by hostile environmental conditions. The implications for galactic balance of power are substantial. What neither military officer mentioned, but both understood with crystal clarity, was that humanity had essentially gained access to thousands of potential military bases that no other species could effectively contest. The strategic advantages were so overwhelming that several minor star systems had already begun drafting diplomatic overtures to Earth, hoping to establish friendly relations before anyone started thinking about territorial expansion. Meanwhile, back on Kepler 442b, Faye was experiencing what she would later describe as the most productive research period of my career. The planet's unique geological formations were yielding data that would advance environmental science by decades, and she was documenting discoveries with the methodical precision of someone who had accidentally stumbled into scientific goldmine. Week 3 summary, she reported during her regular communication update, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone whose work was proceeding exactly as planned. We've completed comprehensive surveys of 4 major geological formations and identified mineral compositions that suggest this planet experienced significant atmospheric evolution cycles. The cold preservation conditions are providing unprecedented access to geological history. She paused in her report to adjust her jacket, a gesture that was being analyzed by xenobiologists across the galaxy for signs of stress, fatigue, or impending hypothermic collapse. Instead, she appeared to be simply getting more comfortable, like someone settling in for a long day of enjoyable outdoor work. Additional observation, she continued, the atmospheric clarity at these temperatures is exceptional for long-range geological surveys. We're able to document formations at distances that would be impossible in warmer climates due to thermal distortion effects. Strongly recommend extending the survey timeline to take full advantage of these conditions. The words, extending the survey timeline, hit the monitoring agencies like a small asteroid strike. Extending implied not only that humans could survive in conditions that should kill them, but that they found those conditions preferable for certain types of work. Dr. Thexmol, Director of Environmental Sciences at the Fellinian Research Institute, was reviewing the communication transcripts with his emergency research team when he made a discovery that would fundamentally alter Galactic understanding of human capabilities. She's not just surviving or even thriving, he announced to his increasingly shell-shocked colleagues. She's optimizing her work environment. She's choosing to stay in conditions that maximize her research efficiency, despite having the option to return to what we would consider habitable environments. His assistant, Kexprin, looked up from her calculations with the expression of someone whose reality had been systematically deconstructed and rebuilt without her permission. Director, if humans can select environmental conditions based on work optimization rather than survival requirements, what does that suggest about their adaptation range? The question hung in the air like a philosophical challenge to the entire concept of environmental limitations. If humans could choose their environmental conditions based on productivity rather than survivability, then the fundamental assumptions about planetary habitability needed complete revision. The answer came 3 days later when Gus Fletcher made what he considered a routine maintenance report, but which would later be studied by environmental scientists as a landmark moment in xenobiology. External temperature dropped to -52 overnight, he reported with the casual tone of someone discussing minor weather variations. Doc's pretty excited about it. Says the lower temperatures are creating even better preservation conditions for the mineral samples. We're thinking about extending the mission to catch the next temperature cycle. -52 degrees. The temperature at which most galactic species would experience cellular breakdown within minutes, and humans were discussing it as a beneficial work condition that they wanted to experience more of. General Fosseran, monitoring the communication from his command center, turned to Commander Dex, while with the expression of someone whose understanding of tactical possibilities had just expanded beyond recognition. Commander, what's the lowest operational temperature for our Arctic assault units? -15 degrees, sir, with full environmental protection and limited operational duration. And humans are requesting to experience -52 degrees because it improves their work efficiency. Yes, sir. General Fosseran sat down heavily, his chair protesting under the weight of someone whose entire military career had just been redefined. Commander, I think we need to completely reconsider our understanding of what constitutes hostile territory. The implications were staggering from every perspective. Economically, thousands of worlds previously considered worthless were now potentially valuable real estate. Militarily, humanity had access to operational environments that no other species could contest. Scientifically, human environmental adaptation capabilities suggested biological possibilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about life itself. But perhaps most disturbing from a galactic perspective was the growing realization that humanity was completely oblivious to the chaos they were causing. To them, working in lethal conditions was simply a matter of wearing appropriate clothing and bringing adequate supplies. They treated environmental extremes that terrified entire civilizations as minor inconveniences requiring basic preparation. The Galactic Environmental Council's final session concluded with the passage of Resolution 2387A, officially designated as the Human Environmental Capability Recognition Act, but referred to by most representatives as the We Need New Textbooks Resolution. The resolution established several key principles. First, human environmental tolerance would be considered a special classification requiring separate habitability standards. Second, all worlds previously deemed uninhabitable due to extreme cold would be reassessed using human-compatible parameters. Third, a new diplomatic protocol would be established for negotiating territorial rights to worlds that humans could colonize, but other species could not effectively contest. Ambassador Othvex, delivering the final statement, summarized the situation with diplomatic precision that barely concealed the underlying chaos. The discovery of human cold weather adaptation capabilities represents a significant development in our understanding of environmental habitability and territorial accessibility. Moving forward, we recommend that all species consider the implications of human colonization potential when evaluating planetary assets and territorial claims. What he didn't mention, but everyone understood, was that humanity had accidentally gained access to thousands of worlds that could serve as colonies, military bases, research stations, or simply nice places to visit during winter vacation. The balance of galactic power had shifted not through military conquest or diplomatic negotiation, but through the simple biological fact that humans could walk around comfortably in conditions that would kill most other species. 3 months after the initial discovery, Dr. Faye Winters found herself appointed as the first director of Extreme Environment Human Adaptability Studies, a position that came with a substantial budget, a staff of increasingly traumatized alien researchers, and what her colleagues described as the most job security in the galaxy. Her first official act was to establish the Human Environmental Assessment Protocol, a standardized system for evaluating planetary habitability using human biological parameters rather than traditional galactic standards. Her second act was to request funding for a comprehensive survey of all worlds previously classified as uninhabitable due to extreme cold. "It's really just basic environmental science," she explained during her inaugural press conference, speaking to representatives from 47 different species who were frantically taking notes on everything she said. "You assess the conditions, prepare appropriate equipment, and conduct your research. I don't understand why everyone seems so surprised by this." The fact that she genuinely didn't understand the galactic significance of her capabilities was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire situation. To Faye, working in extreme cold was simply part of being a competent environmental scientist. To the rest of the galaxy, it was a demonstration of biological capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about what constituted survivable conditions. The final irony was not lost on observers. Humanity had become a major galactic power not through advanced technology, military conquest, or diplomatic brilliance, but through the simple ability to put on a jacket and go to work in weather that everyone else considered impossible. As Faye often remarked during subsequent interviews, "Really, people just need better winter gear. It's not that complicated." But for the rest of the galaxy, it absolutely was. The ramifications continued to cascade through galactic society with the relentless momentum of an avalanche. The University of Centauri Prime established the first department of human environmental studies, offering advanced degrees in what they termed impossible biology. The curriculum included mandatory courses in basic human thermal regulation, advanced impossibility theory, and how to accept that your species is environmentally inferior without having a complete psychological breakdown. Dr. Velthari found herself elevated to the status of galactic celebrity, though not necessarily the kind she had originally envisioned for her academic career. Her groundbreaking paper, Human Thermal Adaptation, a study in biological impossibility and its implications for universal environmental theory, became required reading across 17 different star systems. The paper's abstract alone caused 3 separate academic institutions to declare states of intellectual emergency. The religious implications proved equally profound. The Church of Perpetual Warmth officially revised their theology to include humans as blessed beings of thermal transcendence, which was a considerable improvement over their previous classification of possible ice demons. The sect of Universal Temperature Balance declared Faye a living saint and began making pilgrimages to Kepler 442b, though they were forced to observe her from orbit since actually landing on the planet would have killed them within minutes. More practically, the Galactic Insurance Consortium found itself in the unprecedented position of having to create entirely new risk assessment categories. Environmental hazard insurance, which had been one of their most profitable sectors, suddenly required complete restructuring when it became apparent that humans considered lethal environmental conditions to be minor inconveniences requiring basic preparation. The economic disruption extended into sectors that nobody had anticipated. The luxury resort industry on tropical worlds experienced a sudden decline as humans began expressing interest in what they termed winter vacation destinations. Planets that other species considered frozen death worlds. Resort developers found themselves frantically trying to understand how to market destinations where the primary amenity was conditions that will kill most of our target demographic. Conversely, the extreme environment equipment manufacturing industry experienced unprecedented growth as various species attempted to develop technology that would allow them to compete with human environmental adaptability. The irony that they were trying to engineer solutions to match what humans achieved with commercially available clothing was not lost on economic observers. Gus Fletcher, meanwhile, had been appointed as Chief Human Environmental Operations Consultant, a position that primarily involved explaining to increasingly desperate alien engineers that humans didn't actually use any special technology for cold weather survival. His standard presentation, titled "It's Just Clothes and Common Sense," became the most requested technical briefing in galactic history. "Look," he would explain to audiences of alien scientists hanging on his every word, "you put on layers when it's cold, you stay dry, you keep moving, and you bring enough food. This isn't rocket science, it's basic outdoor skills that any human learns growing up." The fact that basic outdoor skills apparently constituted superhuman environmental adaptation capabilities by galactic standards was a source of constant bewilderment for Gus, who had spent most of his career fixing heating systems and explaining to people why their equipment worked better when they maintained it properly. The military implications continued to unfold in ways that kept strategic planners across the galaxy awake at night. The realization that humans could potentially establish bases on worlds that no other species could effectively assault led to a complete revision of defensive doctrine. Several smaller star systems preemptively offered humanity favorable trade agreements, apparently hoping that being nice to the species that could colonize frozen death worlds might provide some form of diplomatic insurance. General Fosseran found himself reassigned to head the new Department of Human Strategic Capabilities Assessment, a position that involved trying to determine exactly how many supposedly uninhabitable worlds humans could potentially turn into military assets. The preliminary assessment suggested the number was most of them, which led to what military historians would later refer to as the Great Strategic Recalculation of 2387. The cultural impact proved equally significant. Alien children across the galaxy began learning about humans in their basic xenobiology classes, though the lessons had to be carefully structured to avoid causing existential crises among young minds. The standard curriculum included units on why some species can do things that seem impossible. It's okay that your species has environmental limitations, and advanced coping strategies for cosmic inadequacy. Perhaps most remarkably, humanity remained largely oblivious to the galactic upheaval they had inadvertently caused. Earth's media covered the story as a routine scientific discovery, with headlines like "Scientist Conducts Research in Cold Weather" and "Human Adaptability Noted by Galactic Community." The most excitement the story generated on Earth was a brief uptick in applications to environmental science programs from students who thought working on frozen planets sounded interesting. This cosmic obliviousness was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire situation from an alien perspective. Humanity had accidentally demonstrated capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about environmental science, military strategy, and economic theory, and their primary reaction was mild professional interest in the career opportunities. The Kepler 442b research station became a permanent installation, staffed by rotating teams of human scientists who treated assignment to the frozen death world as a desirable posting with excellent research opportunities. The facility's gift shop, which sold T-shirts reading "I survived Kepler 442b," and "All I got was this lousy T-shirt and revolutionary scientific data," became surprisingly popular among visiting alien dignitaries who wanted proof they had witnessed the impossible. 1 year after the initial discovery, the Galactic Environmental Council held its first annual Human Capability Assessment Conference, a gathering that brought together scientists, military strategists, economists, and philosophers from across the galaxy to discuss the ongoing implications of human environmental adaptation abilities. The conference's keynote speaker was Dr. Faye Winters, who delivered a presentation titled Basic Environmental Assessment Protocols, a Practical Guide. The presentation consisted primarily of common-sense advice about dressing appropriately for weather conditions, staying hydrated, and bringing adequate supplies for fieldwork. The fact that this presentation was attended by representatives from 43 different species, recorded for posterity, and later analyzed by academic institutions across the galaxy as a masterwork of environmental science methodology was something that Faye found both flattering and slightly puzzling. "I really don't understand why everyone makes such a big deal about this," she commented during the post-presentation interview. "It's just basic fieldwork. You adapt to the conditions, you bring the right equipment, and you do your job. I mean, it's not like we're doing anything extraordinary, we're just, working." That final statement, delivered with characteristic human nonchalance, was immediately translated into 43 different languages and became the unofficial motto of the Human Environmental Capability Studies program. As the conference concluded, Ambassador Othvex delivered the closing remarks with the weary precision of someone whose diplomatic career had been permanently altered by the discovery that one species could casually operate in conditions that terrified everyone else. "The integration of human environmental capabilities into galactic civilization represents an ongoing process of adaptation and understanding," he announced to the assembled delegates. "We continue to learn, to adjust our perspectives, and to appreciate the remarkable diversity of life in our universe." What he didn't mention, but everyone understood, was that they were all still trying to figure out how to cope with the fact that humans could walk around naked in conditions that would freeze most species solid, and they seemed to think this was perfectly normal. The universe, as it turned out, was a far stranger and more humbling place than anyone had previously imagined. And somewhere on a frozen planet that should have been uninhabitable, Dr. Faye Winters was probably taking off her jacket because the weather was getting too warm for comfortable fieldwork. Really, it was just that simple, and just that impossible.